Welcome back to the latest episode of Across the Bifrost. My name's Sung Soo, and joining me, as always, is my dear co-host from across the pond, Pat Dunford. And today, we're going to cover X-23 and Honey Badger, which should be pretty exciting. But first, Pat, how you doing?
I'm doing really good, thanks, TT, and I agree with you, it is exciting. These characters are super cool. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks for asking, Pat. And before we dive into this, we do want to take a minute and say we have created a public Discord. There's a link for it if you go to acrossthebifrost.com/discord. There's all the information you need. You also just go to acrossthebifrost.com and click the big Discord button. There's also all the information you need. Basically, what we realized is when we say, hey, if you have an idea, you should let us know, Pat and I really didn't do a great job of making ourselves available to listen. So we've created the Across the Bifrost Discord, and it's way more than just Pat and I and this podcast. We've got a lot of content creators from the site, and always adding more. It's just a good way to collaborate with different people from the site. So hopefully you check that out again. Acrossthebifrost.com/discord, and it's all the information you need.
Yeah, I think the Discord's great. One of the things that obviously we've tried to do with the Across the Bifrost Nexus is bring content creators together so everyone can enjoy them. And I think the Discord's a great extension of that, right? It lets us all chat together, lets fans share feedback and ideas with all their favorite creators.
Yeah, it's definitely not a bad thing. So this week, for Sleeve It or Heave It, Pat mentioned a card, and I'm not going to lie, I had to look it up. So it'll be a fun talk, but we're going to talk about Fallback. Pat, do you want to tell us what it does?
Yeah, so Fallback is the card that came out, or can I test my memory now? If I could see which box it came out in.
Oh, I know what box it came out in.
Okay, which box did it come out in?
Hulkbuster.
Of course it did. And it has a picture of Rescue, most likely, on it. And it is an unaffiliated reactive card. When one of your characters is attacked, before they suffer damage, they can spend 2 power. And if they do, they advance short away from the character that attacked them. So it lets you escape, fall back, as it says. Worth noting that you do still take the damage, you just do the movement before the damage happens. This card doesn't let you evade the damage from the attack in any way, but it does let you get some distance, which could be pretty helpful, right?
It could be, and just to clarify something from a rule standpoint, you don't have to be taking damage in order to use this card. The before damage is a timing clause, not a requirement. Where there are some things, if you do damage, you get an effect. You can use fallback on an attack where you were going to receive no damage. The timing of it, however, the interjection into the timing tree for MCP is just before damage would be dealt.
Yeah, which is a little bit weird, but practically speaking, it's useful because even though it happens before damage is dealt, you've already rolled the dice and you know how much damage you're going to take, right? Barring some really weird circumstances. You're going to know something like, okay, my Iron Man is going to take 3 damage for this attack, he's going to have 2 stamina left. Do I want to play fallback? So you still know what's going to happen, and that can influence your decision about when to play the card.
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, the main advantage to it is if you're holding an extract and you don't want them to pick it up, if you're going to get dazed, right? Well, okay, bunch of different. That's probably not the main. The main one is if they have 2 attack actions, you're going to move away and make them miss the second attack. The second option is if you see that you're going to drop something, you can move away from them, and then when they drop it, they might be out of range for the pickup interact.
Yes, I think those are the 2 primary reasons that you would do it. So the first one is if you're going to survive the attack, you're getting some distance they can't do a second. And the second example you gave is if you're not going to survive the attack, right? You're keeping those objectives safe. I mean, there is a third option, which is simply you just want the movement for another reason, right? Like you don't care about the person attacking you, and they're never going to kill you. You're too badass for that. But you just want to use this as a way to accelerate yourself away from them to a part of the board that you care more about, right? Maybe to contest an objective or to attack a different character in a different place.
Yeah, it is important, as we said, right? It is an advance away, so it doesn't give you full flexibility there, but you can do some pretty cool shenanigans with it. You can also get into some really weird situations with it, which I am kind of a big fan of. So like if Wolverine Berserker barrages Ronin, and it would daze Ronin, Wolverine is placed within one of Ronin, right?
Yeah.
Ronin can then fall back to get a short move away from Wolverine. Wolverine then can get the throw, if you're not dazed, to throw Ronin, and then Ronin would resolve his move and hammer someone. I just think you can do cute things like that. But anyway, so a lot of different ways you can use the card. It's I kind of like it, despite the fact that I completely forgotten it existed until you mentioned it today. I think I would be sleeving this.
Yeah, it is a really versatile card, right? And it's the kind of card that you could see so many situations where it's going to confound your opponent and interrupt their activation in a way that's really annoying, kind of similar to Trickster. Where with Trickster, you like cancel the good attack they wanted to make, but then they get to do something else with their activation that's like less good. And with this card, it's similar. They get to make one good attack, but then the rest of their activation is also less good because their primary target has escaped.
Yeah, and I guess one of the other things we don't, it's obviously a very interesting interaction with rapid fire or anything that grants you a secondary attack, um, where rapid fire grants you the attack, but the attack still has to be legal. So if the model is able to move out of your range or something, the second attack can't happen.
Yeah. So I think this card has a lot of potential. I think the kind of teams that I would want it would be ones who are trying to play an evasive game plan by default, right? Because I think then you're going to have more opportunities to use this. It's going to be harder to get value out of it on characters who want to be up close with the people they're fighting against, because too often those people are going to be the only ones they can play the card against, so they don't want to move away from them. But if you've got some teams that want to stay at arm's length and want to mitigate damage, I think this card is quite appealing.
And that's actually what caught my eye on it. Is I've been playing a lot of Web Warriors lately,
Mm-hmm.
and as we're reading the card, I'm like, okay, I could legitimately see myself using this every game, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm getting ahead in scenario early. I'm literally just getting characters dazed and KO'd and kind of writing out scenario to the end. And I could see it just being a useful, functioning, and another annoying card when you tack in Webline, Lifesaver, and all the other weird tricks Web Warriors bring to the table.
Absolutely, and it does combo with those kind of effects, right? Also, tactics cards, lethal protector, mission objective. You can tie all this stuff together in interesting ways to tie your opponent in knots.
Yeah, so I'm going to sleeve it. I'm actually going to toss in my roster, see how it does in testing. So I recently just added Spider Tracker for testing,
Mm-hmm.
and I might swap Spider Tracker out for fallback just because Spider Tracker is so expensive.
I think those cards have similarities, right? In that they're both sort of punishing person for aggressively attacking you. They do it in different ways. I'm not sure which card is better. They seem quite comparable. And it might be good to try out both and figure out which one you like more. You might even decide you want both of them to make your opponent's life really, really tough.
Yeah, and I guess in the interest of full disclosure, Spider Tracker feels expensive. It's the same cost as fallback, so they're both expensive. But yeah, we'll only give it a whirl.
Yeah, at least with fallback, you don't have to be affiliated, right? So all of your team members can play it.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, because yeah, it'll be interesting. Spider Tracker with Mysterio is just like extra griefy if you want to go that route, but he's already annoying enough.
Oh yeah, I mean he can't play the spider tracker himself, right? You just mean.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. No, it's just another thing in his puzzle. I think I might have cheated in my last game.
I mean, fallback's
later.
really good with him, right? He's going to survive one attack quite likely, then he can go back out of range with stealth.
Yeah. So okay, so I think we're both sleeving fallback. Is that accurate, Pep?
Yeah, I like it. It's one of those cards that is a good role player. I wouldn't put it in every team, but there's plenty of places I'd be happy to have it.
All right. So next up, we have the meat and potatoes of the podcast. We've got X-23 and Honey Badger, and I thought we'd start with Laura Kinney, X-23, if that's okay with you, Pat.
Sure. Is she the meat or the potatoes?
Yeah, I don't really know. I went vegetarian a while ago, so I don't even really like making that analogy anymore. It's just kind of something I said. She would be she's the main course, I think, right?
Yeah, definitely. She is badass.
Honey Badger is just like a tertiary piece. Really
Yeah,
good one.
She's very good, but you're right. She's more supportive, whereas X-23 can be the star of the show. So, looking at her stats, right, she has 5 stamina on either side, 10 in total, and the classic stat line of medium move, size 2, 3 threat. Her defenses are 3-3-2, so 2 mystic, not so hot. And her attacks are great. Adamantium Slash is the same attack that you see on Sabretooth and Wolverine, but on a 3 threat character. So that's range 2, 5 dice physical with Wild, Bleed, and Pierce. And Claw Rush is range 3, 6 dice, 2 cost spender that lets her do a medium move and a pierce. So this is similar to Steel Rush on Baron Zemo with a similar name. Her superpowers, she's got Frenzy, which lets her move and make an attack after dazing or KOing someone. Very, very strong, similar to Angela or Carnage. And then she's got a bunch of innate powers. Adamantium Skeleton makes her bigger for throws. Assassin Training lets her re-roll a die on attack or defense rolls, which is huge. Big Sis is a really cool interaction that she has with Honey Badger that I'm sure we'll talk about more. But it means when she is within 3 and Honey Badger is hurt, then she can advance medium toward the person that damaged Honey Badger. And last but not least, she has Healing Factor 2. So she's another character that could use exceptional healing. TT, I think this character is great. What do you think?
I think the character's wonderful, and it makes me a little sad when I do compare her to her clawed older brothers. I know they're not actually brothers, in Wolverine and Sabretooth. I just think she's such a more efficient. You compared it to Zemo. Well, you mentioned a comparison to Zemo, and I think it's a good comparison. Like, Zemo's faster. I get it. But just X-23 has a little more versatility, slightly better attacks in my mind. You do definitely miss the charge. Assassin's Training is huge. I really like her. I think she's a fun, dynamic, good representation of the character on the tabletop. And we'll get to it more a little bit later. I love the interplay between her and her sister. I think these are two wonderfully designed characters that really do synergize with each other very well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to be clear, I didn't just compare to Zemo, right? I compared her to Wolverine, Sabretooth, Carnage, Angela, and Zemo.
Oh, I'm sorry.
4 of those characters are higher threat than her, right? And the other one, Zemo, is considered one of the very best 3 threats in the game. So to be compared to a bunch of characters that are higher threat than her and the best 3 threat, it should indicate what I think of her as well, right? She's so efficient at dealing damage. Her claw attack for a 3 threat character is nuts, right? It does more damage than Wolverine and Sabretooth, right? Because she's got a reroll on her attack.
I mean, I think Berserker Barrage does more damage on average, but yeah.
No, I just mean the claw attacks, right? They have
the Adamantium Slash. No, yes, the better builder for sure.
Yeah, way better builder. And sorry, you're right. I confused. Adamantium Slash is the name of the strike. Claw Rush is the name of the spender. Okay, I'll have that into my head.
I get it. They are both claw attacks, though, so I understand where you were going with it. It just took me a minute to catch up.
Yeah, so her strike for a 3 threat character is nuts. It's in the conversation for the best strike on a 3 threat character in the game. Right, for pure damage output, okay, the range is short, so you can't always apply it. But for pure damage output, it's way up there. It's about equivalent to a 7 dice strike with no bells or whistles, 5 dice with a reroll and a pierce.
You always catch me off guard when you say things like that, because my brain is like thinking of all the really good 3 dice. I'm sure it's got to be up there. I can't think of anyone else off the top of my head. It's real good.
Yep. It's very, very good indeed. And then her spender, Claw Rush, is also extremely efficient, right? It lets her attack from a decent distance at range 3. It's cheap at only 2 power cost. And giving her the move and a good damage attack, 6 dice with a reroll and a pierce, right? That's very good damage. It's just an excellent spender that you're happy to use all the time and gives her really good action economy because it's giving you 2 actions in 1 with the move.
I might like Magic's attack more just because of the typing, but yes, it's probably one of the premier builders in the game, especially when you factor in she's not a 3 threat character. I like what you said about how bouncy you are, her damage output. She does miss charge,
yes,
for sure. The odds of you getting a double attack action on turn 1, for example, round 1, is lower.
It's 0. Even without charge, what is happening?
They could attack Honey Badger, right? That's the way she gets the double attack. It's a weird Rube Goldberg I've set up in my mind there, right? But once she gets stuck in, she does a good job of being obnoxious on a point, bouncing around really well. I think she's a very well-designed character. And I'd like to circle back to her more, but after we kind of talk about X-23, right? Just really good quality of life stuff, right? Adamantium Skeleton making her harder to toss around is definitely relevant.
Yeah, I think it's pretty minor in the grand scheme of things, but it can matter.
Yeah, you're not upset that it's on the card, though, right? She's just got a lot of good passive things on the card.
I don't know. I actually think it's kind of a neutral. I don't think it's advantageous or disadvantageous for her. Because, yes, fewer people can throw her, but when they do throw her, it hurts your teammates more.
I understand why you'd say that. To me, the benefit of cutting out a large swath of throws, just being a size 2 to character throws, outweighs the additional damage you take. But I understand where you're coming from
Yeah,
there,
I
right?
mean, it's
She,
going to depend entirely on who you're playing against, right?
yeah,
Against Valkyrie, you'll be happy. Against Thor, you'll be sad.
that's a fair assessment of it.
Yeah.
But right, Big Sis, Assassin Training, Healing Factor, all really relevant things. And then you mentioned Exceptional Healing as well. Just a
Mhm.
really strong tactic card that her and her sister end up having access to, right? Which, if you don't remember, is a reactive card. Whenever you would be taking damage, you can spend 3 power and you reduce the amount of damage suffered to 1.
Yeah.
So it's just another way to make her just kind of obnoxiously durable. And Healing Factor is honestly it's really nice.
Yeah, what do you think about Healing Factor 2 on a character with 5 stamina and 3/3/2 defenses with a reroll?
She doesn't get as much mileage out of it as some of the tankier characters. But
Hmm.
what I'll say is there's a lot of times where she survives an attack or a character's activation, and the healing factor is really relevant. It's super relevant for healing scenario effects, any kind of damaging scenario effects you don't have to worry about as much. Like if she's outside in the gamma, if she's holding a cube and struggle for the cube. There's all sorts of
Yeah.
interesting ways it gets around that as well. And it also makes people just slightly less incentivized to put chip damage into it, which is interesting, right? I
Yeah.
activate Rocket Raccoon. Rocket shoots someone. I daze them right away. I'm like, oh, okay. Rocket was going to double attack. Do I attack X-23?
You're right. Chip damage is bad into her, especially when you consider the double synergy, right? Which is her healing factor plus big sis, little sis combo. And, if I just put a random 4 or 5 dice attack into her because I can, I'm probably going to regret it.
Right. And that's one of the reasons that I think it's really interesting because the meta more and more to me is getting wider. And there's a lot
Mhm.
of 5 dice attacks out there floating around. And do you really want to attack either X-23 or Honey Badger with a 5 dice attack if you only have one attack and they're yet to activate? It's an interesting decision. Mark and I played a game recently, Mark Garreau, the roster doctor. X-23 got
Mhm.
moved into range of Mysterio, and he's like, hey, I'm just reminding you, do you want to use tricks and traps? I'm like, no, I don't. I don't think I'm going to attack her early on because I know
Yeah,
Mysterio's good into attacking her, but I had other things I needed to activate. I didn't want to I didn't want to risk giving her a point of power when she's just
right.
going to activate and heal the thing off at the end of the round or activation.
Yes, I totally agree. I think healing factor is great. My experience, though, is it's been very feast or famine with her because of her relative fragility. The fact she's only got 5 stamina. When she survives an opponent's activation and she has yet to activate, healing factor 2 is phenomenal. It's a huge amount of extra survivability, right? Where she's functionally becoming a 7 stamina 3 threat character, right? As soon as she uses it once, which is enormous. But it's not that hard still just to take her out in a single activation with a dedicated attacker. And of course, when that happens, you look at her defensive ability and you're like, this hasn't done anything. So it's a little bit binary of a defensive mechanic. So it's a little bit hard to quantify, I think, exactly how good it is.
I agree with you there wholeheartedly. Again, I still really like it in the it avoids chip damage, right? Scenario
Mm-hmm.
effects it heals through. And if you want her to be durable for some
Yeah,
reason, if you're like, I want this 3 threat damage dealing character to be durable, then you take exceptional healing,
right.
which opens up some interesting ways for her not to get dazed out.
Yes.
And then she can swing back quite hard.
I mean, and obviously exceptional healing's great with any healing factor character, but a character that has this much damage potential, but who is fragile. I mean, that card has superb synergy, right? With just keeping her threat alive to the point where you could use her. And of course, it has that synergy with Big Sis, Little Sis, where you can guarantee these characters are only going to take the chip damage that we just talked about is so efficient with them.
Yeah, and again, like if you fail the days X-23, if you have 4 points of damage, the worst scenario, right? She's got a double claw rush,
Hmm.
right? And she heals 2 of that damage away. She ends up with 3 stamina at the end of the round. Like that's monstrous.
Yeah, I mean, her action economy and efficiency can be so nuts, right? Between Claw Rush and Frenzy being ways to get extra moves and attacks, and her builder being so good. As soon as she can get stuck in, you kind of have to deal with her. You can't just leave a character with such an efficient ways to build and spend power alone, right? And if you are just a little bit unlucky, the healing factor is going to punish you very, very hard.
Yeah, and again, like 332 with a reroll, those aren't bad defensive numbers, right?
Yeah, I
It's
mean, it's
you
not
could do a
great,
lot
but
worse.
yeah, she definitely has a good chance of survival against like a couple of builders.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I mean,
Yeah.
So, so yeah, we're both pretty high on Laura Kinney. Let's go ahead and talk about Little Sis now, the Honey Badger, Gabrielle. She's a two threat character. I believe she's still 10 stamina, or is she 9?
She's 9.
She's 9. I apologize. 5 and healthy, 4 in the injured. Medium mover, size 2, 2 threat, 3/2/2 for defenses. Claw Slash, which is range 2, 5 dice, damage power equal to damage dealt, and just wild bleed, so she doesn't have the pierce that her big sister has. She has Hamstring for her spender, range 2, not range 3, important to note. 5 dice, cost 3. If the attack deals damage after the attack resolved, the character suffers slow and bleed. There's a Wild Elusive, which gets her a medium advance. She has 2 dangers to ignore reactive, which Mark Garreau is sort of calling taunt, and I like it. We've seen this on Black Dwarf, is the one that immediately comes to mind, where if an enemy character within range 2 makes an attack, she can basically pull that attack to herself. Cost 2 for reactive superpower. She has Ankle Biter as a passive. This character cannot contest, interact, or hold objective tokens. All right, that's a pretty big negative. We've seen this before. But additionally, when an enemy character within one of this characters is attacked by another allied character, the enemy character rolls 1 less defense die. Okay, that's obviously pretty strong. She has Little Sis, which is just the inversion of Big Sis. When Big Sis takes damage, she can make a medium advance towards the character that damaged Laura. And then she has Healing Factor 1, so not nearly as healy, but still has the keyword and can use... the tactics card name eludes me right now if she wants to.
Exceptional healing.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, she's cool. Very interesting 2-threat character, right? We've talked in the past about how 2-threat characters are quite specialized, and she's no exception, mainly because of Ankle Biter, kind of her defining feature, meaning that she can't play the scenario game at all, right? Just like Nebula. But you get a very interesting utility support effect in reducing the defenses for your other characters to attack the person that she's near. And of course, Ankle Biter and 2 Dangers to Ignore synergize really well, where it gives her a clear game plan, right? She wants to run to the thick of things, stand right in front of big bad guys, stare them down, and just keep fighting for as long as she can.
Yeah, in addition, right, she's kind of bouncy between Little Sis and Hamstring. She has ways to get moves out of attacks or reactive superpowers there, or not reactive, passive. Yeah, I like her a lot. She is squishy, but she's a 2-threat character, so I think it's totally reasonable, right? 2-threat character with a 9 stamina, right? 3/2/2, no rerolls or anything like that. I've really liked her, and I really love the synergy between her and her sister. The two of them on a flank are really, really interesting, right? Honey Badger comes in early. She's obnoxious. She can protect her sister in a bunch of different ways. Ankle Biter helps her sister continue to dish out damage. It's interesting, right? She taunts. You have to attack her. Then X-23 gets the move action, which you might have been trying to avoid. So there's some really interesting synergies between the two. And because I just think they're really well designed. I love how intertwined the two characters are and how well they show that on the tabletop.
Yeah, I completely agree. The combination of 2 Dangers to Ignore with Ankle Biter with Little Sis is just a really beautiful synergy, right? That ties together so well, where the two of them together are very, very effective in a way that's really cool. And I think, like Rocket and Groot, you can play them individually, but they're so much more appealing when they're both on the table together and they're near each other.
Yeah, I think it's... I like the characters a lot. I like the two of them. I do think it's worth pointing out they're both weak to Mystic, which is really interesting following the Convocation wave, which, like, for a bullshit statistic, doubled the number of Mystic attacks in the game. I do think it's really interesting to see them come right after that. We are still waiting for their affiliation tags. I believe they spoiled something on stream, but we don't have the full tag list. Is that correct, Pat?
They said something about Expanded X-Force, but I don't know what they said. And I hear different things on different Discord channels, so... they'll be in some X-affiliated teams, no doubt. One thing that I wanted to ask you about, TT. So, synergy aside with her sister, Honey Badger obviously has Ankle Biter, and we've seen a similar rule before on Nebula with Assassin, right? With Nebula, the big benefit you're getting is re-rolling attack dice, which is huge, right? Very, very powerful effect. Honey Badger has similar stats to Nebula in terms of defenses, healing factor compared to Nebula's healing. Stamina's the same. Range attack bands sort of similar. Nebula's a little better, but more or less the same. What Honey Badger is bringing is the utility of Too Dangerous to Ignore and the defense reduction in Ankle Biter. So Honey Badger is like a support piece who's bringing utility for your team, and Nebula's bringing pure damage. How do you think those stack up? When would you choose one over the other?
Great question. I like Nebula a lot more if I'm only taking Nebula or Honey Badger. I like Honey Badger and X-23 a lot together. I have a hard time. I could see taking X-23 without Honey Badger. I have a harder time envisioning myself taking the Honey Badger without X-23 because I just like Nebula as kind of that piece instead. You lose the way for Honey Badger to get her free move if you don't have X-23 on the table. You want Honey Badger close to people for the ankle biter rule. So that's why I normally associate them together. If I'm just looking at them in a vacuum, I'm not taking any kind of tertiary piece with it. I like Nebula much more because she's a clearer role and it's going to be easier for her to execute that. There are definitely crises where I think Honey Badger would be better because, like you said, Honey Badger wants to move to a central or an occupied point, be obnoxious, take attacks she has no business taking attacks of, and provide a defensive negative to people around her, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I had a bit of an agenda asking you that question because right now in my Sam Wilson Avengers list, I'm running Nebula. But I have a feeling that Honey Badger might suit that kind of affiliation more, right? Where I get a lot of mileage out of redirecting my opponent's attacks. I have a lot of people who make frequent attacks that are low damage, where Ankle Biter could be really good, right? Increasing the chance for Sam's shield to do damage, for example, increases the chance for him to push. It improves Iron Man, Luke Cage, etc., etc., right? All these people making 4 and 5 dice attacks get better. And I like the idea of having some control over forcing my opponent to deal with Honey Badger and triggering my leadership when I want it. So I think you're right that probably I prefer Nebula in a vacuum, but I think there's places where you might just take Honey Badger on her own merits as a 2-threat unaffiliated.
Yeah, I mean, as funny as it is, the other place I see that being viable is actually Guardians, where I have a slew of 5 dice attacks. I'm going wide. I have this obnoxious activation. I don't mind burning early. I actually almost benefit from burning the thing early. She's up there. She's just annoying. She can taunt things randomly, and she provides this continuous defensive negative, right, to just a high quantity of attacks coming in, right?
Yeah, I think that could be very good. I'd be a little bit concerned in Guardians about having 2 characters that can't interact, but
Well,
I mean they're both only 2-threat, right? You could still have a pretty wide team if you want it.
Yeah, and you might end up leaving Nebula at home, which is a weird thing to say, but
yeah,
that's why it's weird to mention it in the Guardians aspect, though, right?
Yeah, but I think that could be viable. I'm also thinking about where these two would fit unaffiliated, because they're such a good pair, and they work so well together. And because X-23 is just such an efficient killing machine that has such good synergy with Honey Badger, I think either of the teams we just mentioned, if they're happy to have Honey Badger, would probably be happy to take them as a pair, assuming that they have 2 unaffiliated slots they can fill.
Yeah, and again, I anticipate them being taken in a pair pretty often, right? I just, it's a relatively speaking cheap package that gets you 2 specialized characters, but specialized not in a bad way. Like they are focused, they have a clear battlefield role, and they are both reasonably good at executing that role.
Yes. And they're cheap, right? There's just quite a big appeal to having the synergistic package that is 2 bodies, that has a good amount of stamina and damage for their cost, as well as the mobility you mentioned. I think it'll be interesting to see how X-Men and X-Force teams evolve with these additions. Like X-Men in particular have set themselves up to be able to do a much wider team than they've ever done before. And with the cover from Storm's leadership, or maybe even the power sharing from Cyclops, perhaps, it could be quite interesting.
See, I really like the place effect with Honey Badger and X-23. It gives Honey Badger another way to get in range for Ankle Biter. It helps X-23 stay on target since she doesn't have an inherent charge to make sure she's maximizing those double attack actions, right? But I think if they end up in that X, I think it's a really interesting thing there. X-Force is interesting. I mean, they're obviously able to put some decent damage dealers on the table, and they're definitely, I mean, X-23 is a good damage dealer, just a little different than their other ways of dealing damage.
Yeah, and with a 5 cost leader, having cheaper characters is always going to be appealing. One of the problems X Force has right now is its cheap characters are all ones that want to stand back away from the fight. So having some that can go and proactively deal with the opponent's side of the table could be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, right at what 13 threat, you get Cable, Domino, Honey Badger, and X-23. Right,
Yeah,
which is a solid, interesting diversion, right? X-23 ends up with 2 offensive rerolls on an attack, which is nothing to sneeze at. So yeah, I
yeah,
like it. I get behind that.
yeah. A couple of other things I wanted to call out. One is I have liked No Matter the Cost on X-23. Just like this card was great on Wolverine, I think it's really, really good on her. This is the Team Tactics card that lets you take damage to gain power that you spend on a spender attack. So X-23's Claw Rush is superb. It's a very, very good spender, and it costs 2. So no matter the cost, lets her pay that price. Her healing factor immediately replaces the damage she's lost. So it's a very good action economy card, which is giving you a range 3 attack that also adds a movement, and it's a high damage attack that can help you engage earlier on, right? You can use this perhaps on turn 1 to advance and then claw rush straight away, get into the fight. And I think that can be pretty powerful.
I don't like to speculate, but I think it might be a reasonable expectation for her to be an Uncanny X-Men. Again, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
If she is, I really like No Matter the Cost and First Class. I think the two of those pair really interestingly, right? You're able to take an advance with X-23. If it's on a double interact, right, she can interact with one thing, spends for Claw Rush, gets a free medium advance at the end of the Claw Rush, and then has another power lift over an interact, right? I think you can end up with a really powerful opening play out of her where she can interact with 2 different objects and gets to make a 6 dice builder with a move tacked on to the end of it. I do agree that No Matter the Cost can be a strong opening play with X-23.
Yeah. It seems very good to me. And I mean, it's quite easy to build a team that has some redundancy in these tactics card uses, right? Between no matter the cost and exceptional healing. It's really easy in both these affiliations now to have lots of healing factor characters. And even if your primary plan isn't available for whatever reason, you can find another way to use those cards effectively.
So I do have a question. How highly do you rate exceptional healing?
I think it's good. I don't think it's a must have, but I do think it's pretty strong. And I think the more characters you have with it, the more characters you have with healing factor, the better it is. So the more characters that can take advantage of it. So, like, I've got much more experience using Odin's Blessing than I have Exceptional Healing, right? They're the
Mm-hmm.
same cards, but for different affiliations. And what I find with Odin's Blessing is there's plenty of times you can misuse it and regret it. And there aren't that many times where it's really optimal, but when it works, it can be a huge swing. So if you're in a situation where most of your characters could take advantage of it, it's easier to get that huge swing. Whereas if you've just got like one character that could use it, your kind of hand is forced. You're like, well, I use it now or they're out. Okay, I guess I use it. But it wasn't that big a deal, right? And the times where it's the most effective are when you deny something very important to your opponent for doing it, right? So at least denying them power can be a big deal, right? Saving a lot of hit points, but also functionally wasting a character's activation or saving yourself victory points. All of those things can matter a lot. So, for example, X-23 is on 2 hit points. I activate and do 2 damage to her. You play Exceptional Healing. That's fine, but it's not good. You've saved yourself a hit point. Maybe I then activate and kill her or use a second attack, whatever. That's a pretty bad use of the card. But if you can find a situation where you're like, you've got 1 attack on X-23, you spike and do all 5 damage to her with a builder, and I'm holding an objective. That's the situation where I slam down Exceptional Healing and it feels great. I've denied you 4 power. I've kept my objective. My character is still alive and can activate. If I can combine all these different benefits, then the card is really strong.
Yeah, it's an interesting card. I am It's one of those cards that has underperformed based on my initial reaction for it. I'm not saying it's a bad card. I
Hmm.
just my opinion of it has decreased. I think it ends up somewhere in like the 8th to 10th card I take if I'm building a roster with multiple healing factor characters. I think having the tandem that can use it is enticing. I like the X-23 especially is a relatively speaking low power usage character with a reasonable ability to generate a lot of power from adamantium slash.
Hmm.
Um, so I like the card on them. I like you do not consider it a must have. I do like the idea of Honey Badger taunting and using it to just
Yeah.
really mess someone up. So I would consider it with the two of them, but it's by no means like you said a mandatory thing.
Yeah. Definitely agree. I also agree that the idea of using it with Honey Badger is cute, and definitely could come up. Um, I think it's going to be better than your average card if you're running both of them.
Hmm.
And I think it's going to start to compete with your better cards in your selection once you have even more healing factor characters, which is certainly possible, right? There's plenty to choose from.
Yeah, I was just curious as your take on it. There are a couple tactics cards that come in the box with these two lovely ladies. We have Jonathan the Unstoppable. Love this card. Unaffiliated active card. Honey Badger may pay 2 power to play this card. Place a Jonathan token within one of this character. While this Jonathan token's in play, it contests objective as if it were an injured allied character. If an enemy character ends a movement within one of this token, remove it from the battlefield. During the cleanup phase, if an allied Honey Badger is on the battlefield and there's no Jonathan token on the battlefield, you may return this card to your available team tactics slot. This card may be played again. So, what do we think of Jonathan the Unstoppable?
I think this card is really cool. I love the artwork. I recently discovered that Jonathan is an actual Wolverine. Did you know that, TT?
I did.
It's so cool. What a cutie. Um, how good is this card? It's a little bit hard to quantify because scoring victory points is great. If I could use this card to get me a victory point, I'm probably happy with it, honestly. Like, that's probably fine. And then if it can get me more victory points because Jonathan hangs around and scores me points turn after turn, or because I get him back and I put him somewhere else, then I think it's really great. But I have a hard time really quantifying how often in games am I going to hit that bar? How often am I going to be able to use this successfully?
It's a weird one, right? It's ideally, and the 2 power is an interesting thing as well because it makes it awkward to use on round one, which is where it has like the
Yes.
most applications in my mind, right?
Hmm.
Round one, ideally, I move up, I place this on my rear D, and I move away from it. And this Wolverine that Squirrel Girl rescued, right? I think Squirrel Girl rescued him, can just sit back there and score it for me for a round or two. But it's
Hmm.
really hard to use this round one unless we want to advance R&D the thing over there. So now what are we looking at with the card? I like the fact that it returns. I mean, that's always an interesting benefit to it. But
Hmm.
I struggle to know how much value it's going to get. I do really, really, really love that it gives Honey Badger a way to be interactive on the scenario, though. That I think is really cool, right? Where this is something that she can't do because of Ankle Biter,
Yeah.
but now she could with a
Yeah.
Wolverine.
Yeah. So I think that utility is really nice. Um, there's some crises that this is better than others, right? So obviously it needs to be a secure where contesting it matters, right? None of the pay to flips do anything for this, right? And then once you pass that hurdle, it needs to be a secure, probably where there's points that are going to have less contention, right? Less interest, because that's the ones where Jonathan can hang around. So, like, your back um, Demon Downtown Portal is a fine place for this, but like you said, the challenge there is, well, I can't use this on turn one. So, how is Honey Badger coming back and handing out Jonathan here? What's the game plan? And it's a bit weird. Maybe on a D crisis map, that's the diamond. You can put it on a flank after you've cleared it up. You know, so X-23 and Honey Badger go onto a flank. They murder some poor fool that tries to stop them, and then they just keep going and they leave Jonathan behind. Like that seems good, but that's one of those difficult to quantify situations, right? Like how often is that going to come up where they successfully achieve their plan and now you're glad you brought Jonathan along?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a fringe card. If you had to ask me right now for like a hot tiki rating, I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
cute card that makes rosters and then doesn't see your 5 that often. I do think it has a place in certain crises. Um, there's so many compelling cards out there nowadays.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're playing a lot of crises where you could use this, and you're planning to take X and Honey Badger a lot, then I'd say give it a go and make up your own mind about how often it's useful. I'm not 100% on it right now. I think if there's a home for it as a primary game plan, it's like you said, TT. It's with an affiliation that can reliably give Honey Badger power, because I don't think I want to be playing Advanced R&D to combo with this, right? But if I'm like taking them in Brotherhood or in Humans, and I just so happen that I can trivially get Honey Badger a second power on turn one, then I can make this part of my turn one game plan. Then maybe that's good enough.
Yeah, it's interesting too, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Jonathan token doesn't count as a character for anything but contesting. So, like,
Right.
Black Order portals won't push the token.
Right, no, it won't interact with the crisis in that way. It won't
Okay.
have any weird side effects.
It's just there to score it if nothing else is close.
Yeah, and you can get some weird situations, right? Like it can score the researcher, but then the researcher can move away. And now Jonathan is just sitting there. But then again, I mean, if Jonathan scores me 2 points as a researcher, I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, it's a. I agree with you. If it scores you one of anything, I think you should be pretty happy with the card. Um,
Yeah.
it's a weird card for sure. The other thing I'll say is Honey Badger doesn't do a great job of generating power when compared to her older sister. It's subtle, but like losing the pierce on the claw slash is pretty big.
And the
Um,
reroll.
right. So it's not that it's ever hard to come up with 2 power, but it's definitely harder than her sister.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right. So it sounds like we're both lukewarm on Jonathan, but we encourage people to go out there and test with it because it could end up being amazing. It's just you definitely need a plan for it.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. Agreed. I wouldn't just throw this in to any team on any crisis combo.
All right, so we're back to one of the things we are the hardest on, Pat, and that is a dual tactic card. So we have Wolverines. Unaffiliated active, James Logan Howlett and Laura Kinney may each spend 3 to play this card. 6 power. This thing better be amazing. When James Logan Howlett and Laura Kinney are within 2 of each other, they cannot be pushed or thrown by enemy effects. They may reroll any number of attack dice. And after an attack targeting either of them is resolved, the attacking character suffers 1 damage if it did not daze or KO the character. The effect of this lasts for a round. What do we think of Wolverines, Pat?
Yeah, so team up cards. The things that we've criticized them for in the past is having a high cost in terms of power spent and a high positioning requirement, especially if the effect is also situational. This card has a high positioning requirement and a high cost, right? You've got to have both of these characters in your roster. They have to both be on the same part of the table. They have to both have a good amount of spare power. And at that time, you need to want to play the card. Now, at least the card does enough useful things that if all those other boxes are ticked, you're probably happy enough to play the card at that point. You know, if they are fighting back to back, then maybe this is what you need. But it's a little bit tough because these are both characters whose attacks make them very mobile. And I'm a little bit concerned that even after you've met all those criteria, as soon as you activate one of them, it's going to be hard to have a good activation and still be close together.
Yeah, I mean, so you activate them next to each other. Wolverine Berserker Barrages moves away from Laura. Then Laura activates later, moves close to Wolverine and receives the benefit again. Like, you can make it work. But man, 6 power is a ton of power. That's the first thing I want to say. It's like 3 power each. That is a 6 dice Helios laser bombardment, right? That is a lot of power we're shoving into the Wolverines. It's also on a character that I think we're both kind of middle of the road on, and that's Wolverine.
Yeah. Now, I think this kind of effect is quite good on Wolverine in that he is tougher than Laura, and this effect punishes your opponent for attacking these characters and not daisy or KO them. It rewards you for keeping them alive. So you want this on tougher characters. So at least, like, I think when you have the pair of them together with this card in play, Wolverine is going to feel better than Laura. He synergizes with the card better. but that's not exactly a ringing endorsement, right? I'm just saying, like, the card does something he wants, I guess, but it. The only time I can really think that I'm going to be super happy about this is when I have one of those games that turns into an enormous scrum in the middle of the table and everyone is just beating each other up, right? I played a game of Research Station this past weekend where the researcher was on a taxi and Luke Cage was standing on top of the taxi. And then Hood, Sam Wilson, Black Widow, Kingpin, you see where this is going, Lizard, and a bunch of Iron Man, all these characters were all contesting the researcher, all surrounding the taxi, right? Because that stupid researcher was so valuable. There were like 8 characters, all within range 2 of each other. In that kind of situation, this card is pretty good, right? My characters want to be at that point anyway. Now you can't move them away, you're disincentivized to attack them, and they will murder you. But that situation doesn't come up very often.
I agree that there's enough relevant. The benefits are good, right?
Yeah.
I think we both agree there. There are solid benefits to it. The effect does persist if one of them is dazed, right? So if Laura gets dazed, Wolverine still receives. They can't be pushed because they're so within 2 of each other.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. 3 is a lot of power, Pat. 2 is not
Yeah.
very far. If this was Laura and her sister, I'd be way higher in the card. I'm middle of the road on Wolverine to begin with. Wolverine has a lot of things he wants to do with 3 power, right? 3 power is functionally his charge action or a Berserker Barrage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe I want to spend it on Wolverines, but...
So one thing I'll say is if you just start with 3 power, then your first strike attack could quickly get that power back, right, with rerolls. So he could still have a pretty good activation where he
But just to
plays
lay
this
out your
card.
scenario, Wolverine is activating within 2 of Laura, within 2 of an enemy character, and he has 3 power on him already.
Yeah, because you're playing one of those ridiculous games like Gamma Wave or Researcher where everyone is just sharing the same part of the
Right,
table.
I'm just walking through everything that has to happen.
Yeah. And I know it doesn't come up very often, right? And I agree that's why neither of us like this card very much, because I think in most games that situation is not going to come up. And therefore, this card is pretty narrow when I want to use it. But in those games, I do think that situation does come up, and this card is pretty good. And maybe if you like playing those games, maybe if you have Gamma Wave and Researcher in your set of crises and you really like these characters, maybe you just take this card because sometimes it will come up and you'll use it.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think if you're going to be playing a lot of Wolverine and Laura, then maybe you look at adding it in. What I'll say is this card is not compelling enough for me to end up wanting to take more Wolverine. Like, I would love another healing factor because I like the idea of 3 healing factor characters with Laura and X-23.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't think I want to run Wolverine and the 2 of them, even with this card. It's just, for me, it's just not enticing enough. There are other avenues I think I'd rather explore.
Yeah, and we've talked already about no matter the cost and exceptional healing, right? Let's say you are running all 3 of those Wolverine characters together. This card is probably 3rd on the list after those 2, right?
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I was just working through them in my head. Yeah. And then...
I mean, they kind of synergize together in that exceptional healing lets you stay alive long enough to get the benefits from this, and no matter the cost lets you save the power that you need to spend on this. So
yeah, it's just interesting because both of those characters are characters that like no matter the cost, right?
yeah,
And I'll just throw it out there, like, I like Weapon X Program.
I like Weapon X Program.
Does a
Definitely
completely
underrated.
different thing. Let me be clear.
Yeah.
A totally different thing. But it's just another tactic card that costs 3 that Wolvie can use, right?
Yes. So yeah, so to be clear, we both agreed that this effect is really powerful, but the problem is the high cost and the very high positioning requirements on characters who have other ways to use that power and who are going to struggle with those positioning requirements, right? The fact their strikes are range 2 and their other attacks make them move away from each other.
Yeah, right. It has a high real cost, it has a high opportunity cost, and it's on a middle of the road character. So For me, I would be heaving it if this was sleeve it or heave it.
Yeah, I think I would be optimistically trying it, and after a bunch of games where I hadn't used it, I also would keep it.
It's one of those cards where I feel like I would have to force myself to take it on my team, which is the way that most testing goes. But I don't look at it and go, oh yeah, I really want to play this. But to your point, right? One in every so much, like once in a while, it'll come up on a weird crisis combination. And to your point, I can be like, okay, sure, let's just jam this stuff down. Let's see what ends up happening.
Yeah, and like we said already, maybe you just want that. You have 10 tactics card slots now. Maybe you want this corner case card of like, look, I don't like playing Research Station, but if my opponent's going to make me do it, then I'm going to send in the Wolverines.
That's a thing. That's a thing you could do. Definitely,
Slice them up.
definitely a thing you could do.
Make them
So
regret it.
that wraps up the Honey Badger X-23 box. I think Pat and I are both generally pretty high on these characters. We're excited to see what affiliations they have kind of coming out the box. There's been a couple different interesting write-ups on them. You can find those over at acrossthebifrost.com. If you want to support us and also help pay for the hosting of MCPDB or acrossthebifrost.com, you can check out patreon.com/acrossthebifrost. You can become a patron, apparently, not a Patreon, as Pat educated me before the pod. We do want to thank each and every one of you for listening, regardless of your status. We do really appreciate that. Please jump over, check the Discord, acrossthebifrost.com/Discord. Until next time, everyone, cheers and happy gaming.